And now, here's your host and transformational life coach, Jerilyn Morgan, with the Magnetic Heart Radio Show. Here's Jerilyn.
Thank you, Dale Guthrie. I really appreciate you making this show happen, and I am excited. We've got a very dear friend, Teri Pugh, here to be my conversationalist co-host tonight.
Excellent.
Teri is a grief awareness counselor and a native of Nashville, Tennessee. How long have you lived in Tennessee?
50 years. Since birth.
Since birth.
Yes, I love it here.
I've been here, it seems like a lifetime. 7 years, it feels like home.
Yeah,
It's lovely
it does.
here. It's probably my favorite place I've ever lived.
Mine too.
So, Teri, you spend your time facilitating workshops and retreats. You work at Vanderbilt.
I do. I wear many hats right now. I do the grief awareness as a coach and basically connecting the dots for people who are processing through all types of grief, hence the name All Things Grief. And then also doing the workshops, retreats, and I also facilitated a class at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution on grief recovery. So grief recovery and awareness.
So you do a lot around helping people come out of their pain.
Well, it's helping them come out of their pain, and it's also more than that. It's an awareness of exactly where the pain comes from and what the pain is and how to create a new normal from the pain. You know.
That's interesting. We'll have to talk about that normal and new normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I wanted to preface the show tonight for all of my wonderful listeners out here in magnetic heartland. I just made that one up. Seriously, I've been very touched by all the responses to Robin Williams. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about that a little bit tonight, because Robin had such a way of touching our hearts and our souls. He was so real and authentic, and you could see his wheels turning, by what would come out of his mouth. He's just so brilliant and so heartfelt. And it was quite a shock to most of us that he gave up and checked out the way he did. And then what I wanted to say around that is there's been different viewpoints that have been quite surprising. Mm-hmm. What feedback have you been getting on this?
I've gotten everything from, why did he give up, to why didn't he reach out if he had the resources and the connections that he had. I've heard everything from it's a weak person, takes their life, to he must have been dealing with so much. And we've all heard it. If you've not been in a person's shoes, then there's really should be no judgment around that. I think that,
So you heard a lot of judgment.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I did too.
Yes. Lots.
Yeah.
And it's very saddening to hear that, because especially at a time when an individual does choose to, put their light out, you would think there would be a little more compassion around that, regardless what judgment you hold on it.
Yeah. What do you think it is that people go into that judgmental stance?
My personal experience with that is that it's a lot of unknowing. We all have our issues and struggles in life, and we don't know what another person's struggles are. And I think a lot of times people may place a judgment on that of, well, I've had a hard life too, but I would never do that. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that people don't, you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I think I'm going to end my life. This is a process that happens over time, and it's a disconnect that slowly washes over until there is so much pain that the only way not to be in the pain is not to be here, And I don't think that it's a selfish act at all, nor is it a cowardly act. I think that it's the only way that an individual may perceive as being free from the pain.
Would you go as far as to say that it could possibly be fear? You did mention the unknown and people not knowing could cause judgment. But when I think of love, and the opposite of love is fear,
Absolutely.
fear goes into all kinds of judgments a lot of times.
Well, and I do. I think the unknown is wrapped in, it's wrapped in that fear.
Yeah.
Because people just don't understand how someone can do that.
So would you say that the coaching that you do takes a lot of the fear out of grieving for people?
That's a good question. I don't know that when clients come to me that there's a lot of fear around their grief. But I think that when clients come to me and their loved ones, and I've had a number of clients come to me that their loved ones have chosen to end their life, and there's a settling that happens there because it does take the fear that they had for their loved one out of the equation, because they have a better sense of what they were going through, because it's really hard for people to grasp. We've all seen it when it's the family and they have the perfect jobs, the perfect car, the kids, and then one day one of them checks out, and everybody's left around going, what happened, and that's what happens.
Yeah. You and I have talked a lot about energy, and their emotions are energy, and we are energy. So how would you describe the energy of the grieving person?
Oh, numb and void, really. There's obviously anger. We've heard the stages of grief, and I'm not so sure that I buy into that there's stages of grief. I don't think that it's a point A to point Z, and then we're done with it. But the energy vacillates back and forth between feeling hopeless and helpless to angry to, there's just so many. The emotional range is it's large.
Yeah. When I think of grief, when I think of the grieving that I've done, at times I felt energetically like there was a brick or a boulder on my chest. Mm-hmm. Or just a closing down of my whole system, my cells. It's like I don't think of the open light times. I'm a generally very happy, joyful person. But at times, I might be just with a friend who's dealing with the loss of somebody in their life. Mm-hmm. And it's palpable, the heaviness.
Absolutely. It's thick.
Yeah.
And I use a phrase all the time that I've used for years in this practice and this work, and it's called armoring up. And that's what it feels like to me. When someone is grieving, you can almost feel the layers of armor that they have put on themselves. And they do it as a protection,
Yeah.
And then there's what we call the veil of grief, and that's...
How would you describe that?
For me, the veil of grief is... It's like a veil. It's I feel like it in my experiences it's cloaked and it covers our ability to see past what is in the immediate moment and what our heart is hanging on to. Our heart holds on to it, and it's really hard sometimes just to navigate through that grief because we're afraid that if we let go of that pain, then we're releasing those memories and we're saying goodbye to that person forever, and that's so not the case.
I think it's so important what you're saying, that need to connect and feel connected even through pain. Mm-hmm. And the expression of pain.
Right.
I've been amazed at my own reluctance to let go of pain, even though intellectually I knew what it was costing me physically and emotionally and wasn't allowing me to move on. It's like the subconscious is speaking more powerfully than the conscious.
Right. I call that our invisible shackles.
The invisible shackles, that's a good way to put it.
That's what the grief is. It locks us, it gets us on lockdown, and we have the key. We each have our key. We just we just lose sight of where we've placed it, and so
But what
we
do you
struggle.
mean by that? What key would you say that we have?
Well, we have the key to awareness, to willingness, to love, to forgiveness. And more times than not, when we find ourselves literally catapulted into the pool of grief, whether it's an anticipatory grief where we know something's coming, or it's just completely unexpected, it's so hard, I think, sometimes for people to just kind of fall into that, well, this is life and we need to work through this. We get stuck, and we get locked in, and it's really difficult for some people to move past that.
Yeah. I had a question come in from one of the listeners who struggles around knowing what to say to somebody who's just suffered a big loss. What would you say would be kind of a formula, if you will, to know how to be there for somebody else that's in intense pain?
Well, that's very individual, but a good across the board is if they are open to touch, being hugged or something of that nature, and then also just telling them that you're here and that they're not alone, and that you're thinking about them. That's, I have said it in the past, and I've had it said to me, I'm praying for you, or I'm, whatever. There's just so many things that people say, and the reason that people say these things, it's because that's all they know to say, and praying for you is great, but some people don't pray. So, there's just a mindfulness of just letting someone know that you're available and you're present and that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And also another big thing, Jerilyn, is that when someone is going through grief, in the first days and weeks of it, everybody's there. It's like, oh, let me know. A month passes, 2 months pass, and then what happens is there's this shift. The person in grief is like, oh gosh, I don't want to bother them anymore because I should be getting over this. They're on this time.
And the reality is just really setting in for the person because they're getting over
Absolutely.
that shock and denial and bargaining.
Absolutely. And then the friends are like, okay, well, it's been a month now, so I'm going to go on back to whatever my life is. And so there's this isolation that happens. So for a person that has a friend or a loved one that's grieving, check in with them. Even if it's a card, if it's an email, if it's picking up the phone, whatever, just check in. And let
Private
them know.
message, text.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
there's so many easy ways to reach out that are personal.
Absolutely.
That I am just amazed. I mean, I love Facebook, the amount of support and love I see pouring out as different friends, show up with unexpected griefs, whether it's their pet or an uncle who died, or they're able to express, what they just lost.
Right.
And then people that they might not even know very well are resonating with that and giving them encouragement, and it's just, I find that to be very touching. And interesting sociologically how things have changed with social media. For those that choose to participate, it's another level of connection.
Right.
Having said that, with the question that the listener had about how can I be there for someone, I loved what you were saying. Just let them know that you're there, that you're available, that you care. And I was often told this story by my mother, how a neighbor came over and polished everybody's shoes. Didn't wait to hear what they could do. They just came over and did something. They mowed their lawn.
Exactly.
Bringing a casserole is kind of traditional, but there's all kinds of ways to show up where we're not waiting for the person in grief to ask for what they need.
Exactly. And another thing that you can do is if you're close with them and you have been obviously in their home multiple times, go over and just sit, take a book, take your cross stitch, whatever it is that's your thing, and let them just be without any obligation. Let them nap, let them just be,
Yeah.
and just share your energy with them
I
in order
love that.
to lift them up.
That is, the whole energy thing is so amazing when you start to learn what energy really is. And I know there's been times when I've had to, quote, borrow from other people's positive energy because mine was so pressed down.
Right.
But I also know that I give out a lot of positive energy. That's a place that I like to be.
Right.
But it took me a lot of years to get to the place where I could receive as much as I had given. But when life knocked me up the side of the head so quick and so ferociously, I was just somewhere down there in that deep well, even with all my knowledge as a counselor and a coach, and at the age I am, having been through a lot of life and a lot of loss, it just showed me how deep you can go into that dark hole.
And grief does not discriminate.
No, it does not.
It does not care.
It doesn't matter who Sunshine Pollyanna
It does
is,
not.
or Mr. Jock on the field that never shows any emotion at all, or
Grief has got a very valid place in our life, but grief is such a bully if you don't know how to communicate with it effectively.
that's a good way to.
Because its mission, the main thing that will happen when we are consumed with it is that we are consumed with it.
Yes.
And it can steamroll us very quickly. And then if we haven't processed and healed ourselves, and the words healing and process to me make it in some ways feel like, again, there's steps to kind of get through this. And, I was talking with a friend one time, we were talking about my grandmother, and she transitioned 30 years ago. And I don't grieve, per se, her now, but I can talk about her and still become emotional and start crying. But I quickly work my way, I honor what comes up. And then I work my way through all of the lifetime memories that I have with her instead of the one isolated transitional moment,
Yeah.
And we kind of get stuck in that transitional moment, and then we're not connected, and we lose touch with all of those great gratitudes and those moments that happened leading up to that,
Right. So, what would you say would be a real handy tool for somebody who is just stuck in that real deep, dark hole?
Checking in and finding out why that serves them to be in that deep, dark hole.
Interesting.
What is it? What is it that
What's the payoff?
what is it about that makes us feel that that's what we're deserving of, and nothing more but pain?
Yeah.
Now, and rightfully so, when, if we lose a parent, a child, a spouse, a friend, obviously we're going to have grief around that. But when we choose to just hang out there and, put our waders on and just drudge around in that, and nothing, and I'm not talking about 6 months, even a year, I'm talking about compound stuff that happens, over a lifetime, and it becomes our normal. It becomes what we expect.
So you get, it's almost like you're so used to that low battery that you forget what a fully charged battery feels like.
Right. That's what I say to my clients. It's like, what's the payoff for living a half-charged life? What is that?
You could really say that to just about anybody.
Yeah.
The quote from Marianne Williamson about our greatest fear is not what's it's the greatest fear. I know what it is. It's being wildly successful.
Right. It's not the fear of the failure. It's the fear of the success.
Fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
So, fear of living in this happy, fulfilled, connected place. It seems like we would gravitate to the light so naturally and so readily. It's like, oh boy, I can't wait. And then something steamrolls so fast and so hard and triggers, I believe, triggers into not just the current situation, but a whole bunch of ungrieved losses.
Absolutely.
Many times. It's a compounded grief.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that you are a coach that helps people get through that compounded layers of grief. Is there anything that you can shed light on for someone about what that process looks like?
It begins with a willingness, being willing. It doesn't mean that you walk into your first session and you're like, all right, let's do this, because that's not going to happen. It's a willingness to just embrace that you are worth a fully charged life. You're worth that happiness, that joy, and we're human. We stumble, we have missteps from time to time. But, living in that place where we can recognize the gratitudes that are in there, and that's hard for some people, but the process.
Well, would you say if there's a lot of resentment or bitterness or even anger that somebody left, that there's an attachment to that that makes it impossible to allow the good to start flowing in?
Well, there's an attachment to it, but nothing is impossible. So they can do that,
right?
As long as they're willing. And the forgiveness is not for anyone but the person that's doing the processing. You can forgive someone and still not want to spend time with them. You can forgive someone for taking their life and still, appreciate the time that you had with them and still get a little pissed off from time to time that they left you,
Yeah. Even if it was a sickness that they couldn't help or an accident, I've worked with people that are angry that they were abandoned by that person. Mm-hmm. Even though intellectually they knew they shouldn't be, which there should be no judgment around the should or shouldn't be,
right.
But the ability to process through that.
Right, and that gets into a whole other realm of God and, why this happened to me and all of that. And it's really, I've got a 20-year-old daughter, and I tell her all that. Actually, she's 21 now. And she's grown up hearing me just say over and over and over, it doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And that's a hard pill to swallow when a loved one,
What are some of the responses you get when you say that?
I've had people say, gosh, I never thought about that. I've had people say, that's bullshit. I've had a lot of responses. But the thing of it is it's not, that's a judgment. It's a judgment. Because really and truly, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And whatever it is what we attach to it.
So it is what it is. And what if there were no judgment? I find it so empowering to just right off the bat say, all right, whatever feelings, whatever thoughts, we're going to throw out any judgments. We're just going to be open and curious and loving to whatever wants to come out or be expressed.
Right, absolutely. The hardest one that people have with that is shame.
Yes, let's talk about that for a few minutes, because it took me a while to figure out what the difference between shame and guilt was. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about shame, how would you define that to the people you're talking with?
Shame is when there is not only an embarrassment, but an unworthiness and a guilt, and it is an element of guilt, mm-hmm. But it's a more deep-seated guilt or shame. Yeah. We don't want to embarrass ourselves or others, and usually shame generates, that seed has been planted early on, before we even had cognitive memories of what shame could be,
Well, let's talk about an example, because this can get kind of like hard to understand.
A good example of shame, which its counterpart is embarrassment, is, for instance, if you are, there's a story I heard one time about a little girl that was like 3 years old, and she was dancing in the aisles at church. and she's dancing and she's singing and she's having the best time. Well, her mother looks at her and says, "Stop it, you're embarrassing me." So immediately this small child shuts down and she begins not to express herself because she might embarrass other people. And then what happens there is we adopt that as our belief. I'm embarrassing. I'm going to embarrass them. And then it's I'm an embarrassment. And then it's I don't want to embarrass myself. And the next thing you know, you're 50 and you don't want to sing karaoke because you're going to be embarrassed. You know what I mean? And so it's just this whole thing that, and then they go see someone and they talk to someone about their pain. And then it's a constant apology. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And it's like, there's no shame here. There's no
It's
shame.
really
Is not,
interesting where those beliefs come from. And like a little 3-year-old child can't really process
Not at all.
what's going on, but energetically they feel it, and that feeling of, well, shame to me, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if it's really embarrassing, you can feel like hot and cold running up and down, where you just, like, you want to be swallowed up. I mean, that can be pretty severe pain. The other kind of pain is more subtle, but like a little child that doesn't have thoughts around it, there's that belief that forms around that trigger of somebody that might disapprove, or, here you are 50 and afraid to let it all go at karaoke and just have fun like a little kid would.
Right.
And then I also see the same people that are afraid and, would rather just sit back on a chair than to be vulnerable like that, making judgments around the people that do get up. And
Exactly.
And again, that's fear attached to shame being projected. And it's like, where's the fun,
And at the bottom of all of that, there's some form of loss or grief or
Yes.
something that's unresolved.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have that urge, to kind of secretly and pass those judgments.
So you know how you can be watching, maybe this doesn't happen to you, it happens to me a lot. I can be watching the most joyful thing where somebody's being honored, like Mr. Holland's opus, and I could just weep out of happiness for the storyline, but I know it's more of it's a deeper level of wishing that I could make such a difference in the world. So that taps into that pain of, wouldn't that just be amazing to know that you had come to the end of whatever time that you were serving, and have that honor and value, and it's validated. It isn't about ego. It's about bringing yourself and your purpose and passion to the world.
It's stepping into your light.
Yeah.
It really is.
And so this happiness is also attached with all this pain and sadness. Only it doesn't feel sad, but you're weeping.
Somebody triggers it.
It's the most ironic
And
thing.
then all of a sudden, it hits the fan, but
Yeah. But my whole point is, it's such a passion that I believe most of us share that gets shut down. And so when we see somebody truly shining and stepping into their light, it causes this softening.
I'm still fascinated with your analogy of the bully. Anybody that knows me knows I love analogies and metaphors, and I really think that analogy holds true not just with this one we're talking about, but because people handle bullies different. Some people fight back at the bully, and those are the tough people, and some people cow down to the bully because they're intimidated. And I just was curious if do you deal with both sides of that, or just more the grief side of that side, or if you've dealt with both sides of the people that you've got to deal with that have to deal with that part where they've fought the bully and they've got to learn that you don't want to go too far, because there is that extreme. You can go extremes either way, and I think that's a great analogy of dealing with those kind of feelings, that it's this outward thing that's attacking you, and how you've been trained to deal with that is how you deal with that bully.
Right. Well, it's an outward thing that's attacking us, but what's actually rising to the occasion is our own little gremlin inside.
Yours.
You know, and that's that one. That's the what people call it your inner child, your wounded self, whatever you want to call it. But that's your familiar. So, and whether you're cowering down or whether you're fighting back, both of those are fear-based. You know. And so, but yes, and I deal with people from both sides of it, and it's interesting because what will happen is, obviously I don't work with them at the same time, but what will happen if I were to do a panoramic view of everyone, the ones that are silent find their voice, and the ones that have their really loud voice learn to turn theirs down, and there's just this level of really respect, and it's more self-awareness and self-appreciation and self-love. And then they're detached from all that external stuff, because they realize at that point it's not even about them. You know, it's so not about us. You know,
you're taking the judgment and the fear out of it, and you're asking people, instead of reacting, to just be.
Just be.
Just be, and that is so easy and so hard all at the same time.
It is.
Especially when people don't let me be what I want to be.
I got it. And it's easy to lash out at people like that. And what is so empowering for me is that the way we have been taught to deal with the stressors in our life a lot of times gets us more of what we don't want.
Absolutely.
And so, in order to get what you want, if you can focus on what you want, let's say two friends are really angry with each other. And if the intention changes from having to be right or needing to change that person, maybe get them out of their grief because they're so stuck in their pain, and it just makes this person really upset because they can't fix it, and no matter what they say, the other person's resisting and just determined to stay in victim mode. Mm-hmm. Versus just the other person allowing the friend to be where they're at and maybe asking some sincere, curious, non-judgmental questions.
Right. And that is great. What comes up for some people, though, the ones that are headstrong, that the friend needs to get out, forget about it, let's move on, let's do this and this, be happy, don't waste life. That's because that's what they pull out of their toolbox.
Yeah.
So they're not familiar with the fact that this friend that they may have known their entire life they don't process their grief that way. Because grief is a tricky thing, and more times than not, we don't process it. We'll say, it doesn't matter, I'm over it. And 2 years down the road, something will happen, and all of a sudden, at light speed, this stuff is coming up, and we don't know where it's coming up from. We just know it's coming up, and it's emotionally attacking us and leaving us depleted. And we don't know what to do with it.
Well, let's talk about some of the ways that it manifests when it's not dealt with, when it's pushed down and ignored and told to go sit in a corner, I've got life to do, What are some of the ways it manifests?
It manifests not only physically, mentally, and emotionally, but spiritually. I mean, it literally can take your knees out at any level. It can physically in your body, diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, there's bulimia, obesity, you name it, alcoholism. There's so many what I call drug of choices, the numbings and the self-medicatings, and all of those things are wrapped around wanting to not feel, or a quick fix to feel better. And then what happens is, take the person that drinks. They drink to forget that they have issues or there's grief. And then they fall off the wagon, there's a huge binge, and then they kick themselves 3 times harder because they've done that. So now they've got not only the grief they were dealing with, but this new layer of grief.
And the shame wrapped around it.
Absolutely. And the one thing I tell people all the time is you need to know right up front, your gremlins have floaties. I don't care how much you drink, they are in there just floating it out. You know, they're just waiting. You know, they're waiting because it doesn't affect the bottom line. It does not affect that. So all the self-sabotaging that we do, whether it's toxic relationships or drugs, alcohol, food, sex, shopping, I mean, there's so many. There's so many. Drama, you know.
Well, anything that's out of balance at the detriment of the person is pretty much can fall into the addictive category.
Right.
Self-medicating.
And when we're sending that energy out, law of attraction is that
Yes,
energy is going to come
that's
back.
right.
And so that's where the mindfulness and the willingness and the awareness comes in, because at some point, you know, it behooves us to kind of step back and, you know, okay, what's more important here? You know, getting healthy, trying to find a new normal, or just staying in this and living numb, you know.
So I'm sure you've asked the question to many people about if they're really ready to do the work, to let go.
I do. And
how important is that?
It can't happen if they're not ready. You know, it doesn't mean it won't ever happen. Right. It just means right now, in this moment, they're not ready. And I would rather someone see me a few sessions and then say, you know what, I'm just not ready, and step away from it and take the tools that they have and let that sit for a while and then come back when they are ready. And I can tell the difference between I'm not ready and, oh, Jesus, I don't want to do this, and the excuses. Because I'll throw down the BS card real quick on that one, and it's like, look, you know, we're going to be real here. You know, this is the process, you know. And I go at it when I work with clients, I mean, I'm human. So there's, you know, I'm going to be real with them. There's also going to be humor. There's going to be, you know, anger on their part, which is totally okay, you know. And it's, again, no shame. It's them showing up, you know, with who they are and saying, here I am, I want to do something.
And you hold that space of safety, meaning they can bring to the table what's there without judgment, without repercussion.
Right.
Well, being honored and respected and valued. And that is so powerful even in itself, that dynamic for healing to start.
Right. The only thing that is not on the table is if they are they have voiced hurting themselves or hurting someone else. Yes. Then all bets are off, because I would not be doing my job if I were to let someone leave and just say, well, I don't want to say anything about that because I told them I wouldn't. That's not cool, you know. But everything else that they bring, from I remember when I was 2 to what they did right before they came to me, that's their story, it's their truth, and I'm a vault, you know. And then I do, you know, well, you know, energy work. So there's a lot of things that I do for myself prior and post sessions, just to not have that, you know, the emotion, the energy, the heaviness, whatever.
Yeah.
So
the whole concept of energy and the energy being stuck or blocked in the body, wrapped around the beliefs and things that come out and sabotage everything in our life. What could you say to our listeners about the process of releasing that energy? Energy is kind of mysterious to a lot of people. So how would you...
An analogy that I use, and you'll appreciate this, is it's like a 2-liter Coke bottle, okay? And you take a 2-liter Coke bottle and you drop it and you kick it around and you shake it up, and it expands. And with grief, just like that Coke bottle, if you go in there and you just take the top off, there's a huge explosion. It's just
Coke all over
you cannot, it just, you know, it's not going to work. So with grief, it's going into it, walking into the wound a little at a time, just like unscrewing the top on the Coke bottle. letting it let a little, carbonation out, screw it back up again, and let it settle. So that's the process stage. And that's what it is for people, just allowing them to find their way in their own time, but with guidance.
Yeah.
Because trust me, I mean, I sometimes I'm finding my own way, and I can, I would be there forever. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll just hang out here for a while. So there's gentle guidance and nudging and kind of that, let's be real here.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
You
so-
find that you have some people that like the explosion part to happen. I mean, have you encountered that some? I mean, I've a few people that I've worked with on different levels besides counseling like that. Sometimes people just like to get it out loud at once and then kind of wheel back in. Do you experience some of that too?
I do. And that's okay too. It's really, and see, it's their process. So it's whatever they're familiar with, whatever their thing is and whatever works for them. Some people will come in and say, I'm just here to get tools to help my parent. And I'm like, okay, awesome. And a few weeks into it, it's like, there's all this stuff, and it's just like, okay, this is good, because there's no judgment of, really, you're really here, really, and I don't even think that stuff, because it's, I mean, I've
You just allow people to be where they're at
that's all I can do.
and invite them to explore what step they want to take next, right?
Right,
And
right.
what works for them is what works for them.
And the reality is they wouldn't reach out if they weren't ready
Yeah.
for some step in some direction. And like I said, even if it's just basic tools for them to know that they're not crazy,
Yes.
that this part of life really does suck for them. There's a lot of things. And sometimes they don't even connect the dots to, well, I don't understand why this is bothering me. And we'll kind of peel back some layers, and then they're like, oh man, I totally forgot about that, And that, when they get to that part, it's, there's a big difference in someone rediscovering for themselves something that they never processed in the past, that is still a gaping wound for them, and someone coming to me and saying, there's huge blocks of my life that I don't remember, and that's not my job. We're not going to dig shovels out and start
Right.
drudging up stuff in the past, because if you don't remember it, there's probably a reason, and you're already in the space you're in now, so we don't go there.
Do you think that scares a lot of people, that they think they're going to have to get down and uncover all this stuff? And
Absolutely. That's the one thing that I hear consistently.
yeah,
I don't want to go back and feel that pain again. I don't want to have to go back and relive that. And I'm like, don't. We're not. All of whatever that is got you here. You just need to know what your vision is for where you want to be.
yeah.
And then we're going to, occasionally, yes, you do have to dip your toe back there, but we don't go back and pack a lunch and sit down on a blanket and rehash all of life's things. It's just not necessary.
No, it's not. We've got several programs going on. Some of the things that you have to offer people, how could they reach you and plug into what you're doing?
I am, my website is www.allthingsgrief.com, and I have email and phone there. Also, I'm on Twitter at All Things Grief, and I'm on Facebook at All Things Grief. So,
So it's easy to reach you.
It is easy to reach me, and we can talk about
Teri
all
Pugh,
things grief.
P-U-G-H.
Well, I'm going to send you some people because I do say really, really. So I'll send you all my really people that don't want me off over to you.
Wonderful.
Also, the Magnetic Heart is sponsoring a workshop coming up this Saturday called Soul Tuning. And we haven't really talked about the soul part of all this, but really it's what our heart and the desires of our heart is all around. People don't really want to be sad. People really love comfort and beauty and peace and joy and love. Some people are more afraid of that than others. But what soul tuning is all about is just respectfully going into the stuck energy places with a beautiful process that releases old blocks of shame and anger and resentment and anxiety and guilt, all those things that are attached to energies that happened before we could even understand what was going on.
Right.
And then we fill it up with the focus changes from what people aren't getting, what they're not experiencing in their life that they would really love to experience, to what is it that they want. And it's magical how this process can shift people out of pain, even if it's just for the moment, into this hopeless, even suicidal place, or just that awful feeling of being depressed, where you can function, but you're just unhappy under the surface. And this totally creates a space of allowing the beauty and the love and what's really there to start coming up again. But so that soul tuning workshop, if anybody wants to join us on that, it's a very small exclusive workshop. So I have a few spaces, but I would love to have you let me know if you want to come at themagneticheart@gmail.com. And that's themagneticheart@gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook and let me know with a private message. But between things like that, and Teri, I'd love to have you assist with that. It'd be awesome to work with you. Again, can you tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I am on Facebook at All Things Grief. My website is www.allthingsgrief.com, and on the website there is my email, which is allthingsgrief@gmail.com. I'm keeping it simple. It's All Things Grief. If you Google that, you'll find me.
So whether it's grieving the loss of a job or the loss of your youth, whatever depressed thing is going on in your life, you can help shift that with people.
I have women who, and this is a touchy subject, but I have women who have had miscarriages or terminated pregnancies, and years later they will get pregnant and they'll have a child. And when this child starts going through high school graduations, college graduations, weddings, stuff comes up.
Yeah.
Because they've never processed the past. And again, that's not something that we have to go and just, drudge through, but it's just an awareness and an acknowledgement, and that's anything. I mean, grief can be around having your home foreclosed on.
Oh, for sure.
Grief can be around a loss physically, or the death of a pet, the physical loss of a pet, of a loved one. It can be loss of a job, your identity.
Even a lot
your
of change
security.
going on in your life of any sort is a
Absolutely.
loss.
Absolutely. A loss of a friendship. If you've had a friend that's been a really good friend for years, and then you've had a falling out, and there's this just distance there, you mourn and you grieve that friendship of what was,
Yes.
So, and I think a lot of people, if I had to poll 100 people, over 80 of them would tell me that grief is about a loved one dying.
Right, that's what people think of normally.
And it is about a death, but not just a physical death.
Yeah.
It's the end of something.
Well, we have a lot of service people coming back from the war who are their normal is never normal again after
Never.
what they have witnessed and experienced over there. And that the post-traumatic stress is all about huge losses and horrendous events that are almost too difficult to process. So that's kind of the other extreme of it. But what I want to say to our listeners, I'm sure you do too, Teri, is that whatever you are experiencing, it's important. You are valuable enough that what you experience matters, and to have somebody listen to you and help you come up with a plan to help bring the peace and the just the space for good things to start coming into your life again. You don't have to settle for this feeling of things aren't quite right in my life, they're out of balance, and where you watch yourself just getting in deeper and deeper of feeling stuck.
Right, right. And PTSD is not just for military. You know, I have several clients that have that suffer from PTSD. You know, I also have several clients that are out of the military now. So it's just a wide range, and you're right. Every person's journey every person's pain, their grief they're all different. No two are alike, but everyone's process and everyone's healing abilities are essential and monumental to their overall well-being.
Sure.
Because everyone has a gift, and collectively, as energy goes, we need everyone and their gifts. Because I know we'll talk a little bit more about Robin Williams in a bit, but the ripple effect that was sent out with his transition or passing has really unnerved a lot of people who suffer from grief, who used him or looked to him as the happy person. And then when the happy person left, then they don't know, it's a very unnerving ripple effect that goes out, and it leaves a lot of people shaken up.
Yes, let's talk about that right now, because we only have a few minutes left for the show.
Okay.
But what would you like to say about that?
Well, first off, it is a tragedy when anyone ends their life, but I think that we have vices that we look to, and I think that it's unfortunate and most definitely catches like a nation off guard when someone that we look to, we find out later. I have friends that said, oh, I knew he had problems. I have other friends that are like, I had no idea, And like I said, that leaves a lot of people kind of floundering because they don't really know where to go with that. Like I said, people have said, he had resources. Why didn't he reach out? And again, when you're in that disconnected dark tunnel and you've started to slowly disengage from everyone, the thought process that goes through that person's mind is nothing that anyone who has never been there will ever be able to understand.
Or relate to.
Never.
Yeah.
We can read it in books, we can watch the movies, whatever you want to do, but unless you've actually been there, there's no way that you can relate to that. And,
I think that Robin's gift, in one way, if you can look at it as a gift, one of the things that he did leave was not only a life where he poured his heart and soul into what he did, but just this discussion that's going on.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
And see, and that's where when I work with clients, we talk about the gift in the loss, or the gratitude in the loss. And a lot of people will say there's not a gratitude in, someone dying. No. And it's like, you know what? You're right. In that moment, there's not a gratitude. But you step away from that just a little and expand your heart and have a willingness, and look what has come out of this now. Everyone, I have had people contact me to say, I've never told anybody this before, and they are starting conversations that will save their lives or someone that they love, and that's huge.
Yes,
huge.
It is.
And that happened, those gifts are happening because someone that everyone knew was a happy guy ended his life.
And it was okay for them, having seen the responses, thankfully, from a lot of people that were very positive.
Exactly.
And encouraging people to connect and to talk about what's going on.
Right. They felt safe.
They felt safe.
They felt safe. Yeah. And for just, even if for a brief moment, the shame Richter scale was turned down a little bit. Yeah. Because everybody's talking about it. So if everybody's talking about it, I can talk about it too.
And if somebody as cool as Robin Williams checks out, then, maybe I can say that, you know what, I suffer from that too. And I've had a lot of people come to me with that in the last week. Unbelievable, in a beautiful way, what's opening up around it. And so I'm really thankful that you've come on this show tonight with the Magnetic Heart. Teri, what you're doing is just, you're there as a safety harbor with a lighthouse. And I just want to encourage any of our listeners, if you're out there and you have, if you're just feeling depressed on any level, wherever you're at on that scale of depression, you might not be in suicidal depression, you might just be in I'm not feeling like I want to feel kind of depression. That's important too. And I wanted to ask you before we ended the show, what the most important thing is, if you could boil it down into just one sentence.
Loving yourself enough to ask for help.
I have to say I agree. I was thinking in a broader thing of connection, knowing that connecting with yourself as a real human being who has needs and wants and feelings and has a right to express them and be heard is exactly what you're talking about, that loving yourself.
It is. It's just loving yourself. And sometimes that's hard.
Yeah.
But you can. And
sometimes it's easy when you start and have somebody to help guide you into what that looks like and sounds like, right?
It's finding a new normal.
Finding a new normal. So wherever you are out there in listener land, I love you. Here at the Magnetic Heart, that's what we're all about, is lighting up your hope, your little hope wick, and getting out there and daring to believe that who you are matters and that you make a difference. And if you are in pain, please, you are valuable and you matter enough that if you can't find anybody else, call us.
Right.
Teri, again, they can find you at...
They can find me on Facebook at All Things Grief at allthingsgriefgmail.com and at www.allthingsgrief.com.
Or the Magnetic Heart at gmail.com. We love you, Dale.
Thank you, ladies, for a great show. Thank you, listeners, for listening. You've been listening to the Magnetic Heart radio show here at WRFN LP Pasquo 107.1 FM. This is RadioFreeNashville.org, station by the people, for the people. We're going to have a new tower coming soon for more frequency broadcast. Again, we've enjoyed a really great show with your host, Jerilyn, Morgan, along with Teri Pugh here tonight, talking about a lot of great things.